Hi. You're muted unless you change something.
There we go.
I think we're good now.
Took a little effort, but we're there.
Yeah. Okay. Now I'm not coming up with names. I see Mike and Ann.
Yes.
That's correct.
And
Mike and Ann Wanger.
Okay.
We usually stream. We attended for about a year or two a year ago.
Yeah.
We're now in McKenzie Bridge, Oregon.
Yeah. We used to live near Spokane, so we could attend in person for a couple of years, but we've now moved to Oregon, so we normally just stream the service on Sunday. And we're after Todd's YouTube about the UUA meeting and the 7 principles and blah blah, we thought we'd like to join this meeting today just to hear a little more about what's going on.
Well, welcome. I having RV'd for about 18 years, my suggestion or thinking is that you're in an RV.
Yes, that's correct. Yeah. Yeah, we've lived full time in an RV for almost 25 years.
Great.
Yeah. So, yeah.
We bought a lot in a co-op here, an RV co-op in McKenzie Bridge, Oregon, about an hour east of Eugene.
Yeah. Is that one of the escapees co-ops or one of?
No, but similar.
Yeah.
Similar. Okay.
Yeah, really? we are escapees members and have utilized their parks over the years, but yeah, this is a co-op along the McKenzie River. In Central Oregon. Yeah. Good. So good. Yeah.
And fantastic area. I've been through many times.
Yeah. Thanks for hosting.
Country.
Yeah. Good. Excellent.
Yeah. So some of us don't drop in on the service that you attend. If you stream it or are on Zoom at 9:15, I'm not. I'm an 11 o'clock person, so that's why I didn't know you.
Yeah, we usually stream at 11. Although some days, depending on what we've done 9:15 too. Depends on when we wake up and what's going on.
We got scheduled for the day.
What else is scheduled for the day? So sometimes it's like, let's get it over. Let's do it at 9:15 and be done. And other times we're monkeying around and it takes us till 11 to get life organized. So yeah, we haven't done the Zoom at 9:15. We've always just sort of done the live stream because that just feels easy for us. Good.
Well, hey, can you guys hear me? This is Betsy.
I bet.
Hey, I just looked at who's on the call. We've got a quorum. I am happy to report for this last meeting of the fiscal year, board meeting. I'm not going to be using my camera. I'm holding up my phone. I'm in the car. Con Sweet Sister is doing the driving. We're on our way back from Salmon to Spokane today. I've been on vacation the last couple of weeks, so including today. So a little hodgepodge. Yes, wonderful. So I am going to call this meeting to order since we have 5 votes. I'm not too hopeful that Lilia will join. I haven't heard from her. And Catherine told me that she was driving today, or traveling over to see her mom, so she won't be able to join. So I think we are ready to get started. So I think the first thing to switch, since I'm doing this on my phone, it takes a little bit of context switching here. The first thing, of course, is our call to order, and then is to approve today's agenda. So I apologize for sending out an agenda with a time on it. Again, part of the vacation thing, I don't have my computer, couldn't easily modify the 4 p.m. start time, but you all seem to figure it out. So thank you for that. That we're starting at 3:30. So otherwise, the agenda is the same one I sent out a week or two ago, but I believe there may be some amendments to this agenda that are being suggested or would like to be proposed. So I'm kind of asking for those now. What you guys want to talk about? Tom, I think you had some stuff.
Well, you and I talked a bit about some of this. It seems to me that in order to make sure we get to this at the very end of the agenda items, that maybe substituting in at number 4 and 5, that we have a discussion, since we have our 2 newly elected board members with us, that we talk about the times, the dates and times for not only the upcoming July meeting, but for the future meetings, to see if what we're currently using, which is the 3rd and 4th Wednesday of the month, and then, deciding on what times work for people, that we ought to have that discussion as items 4 and 5 on the agenda. And the fifth item was whether Todd wants to talk about just giving a heads up on the retreat, and whether people could begin to throw dates and times at him for retreats that would work. And then I wanted to introduce before the shared ministry discussion, introduce the submission of the board, which you have received in advance, of a replacement email policy for consideration at the next board meeting, not to be discussed in this meeting, but for people to have a chance to look at it. And then it'd be a discussion topic at the next board meeting. And then I wondered whether there was a treasurer's report from Dick, that would need to be an item that would squeeze in there maybe after shared ministry. And then finally, just so that it's a matter of record, I thought we ought to note under unfinished business the 4 items we talked about for the incoming board, and that being a new strategic plan, including possibly a visioning exercise, a study of new revenue sources, a consideration of the role of 7 principles, since it didn't end up in the bylaws, and
Don't we have, so sorry to interrupt, Tom, but don't we have something already on the agenda regarding the 7 principle bylaw amendment?
Yeah,
well,
it's in the agenda at the bottom.
yeah, but as far as something that maybe the next board would have to deal with, as far as having a congregational conversation or something like that. So yeah, it can be integrated in there. And then the other one is a consideration that we have previously talked several times about, and that is sometime having a congregational conversation about whether whether it's time to withdraw from the UUA. So I kind of got a reordered agenda if those items are okay to include in there, that
I'd like to note on the treasurer's report that Rebecca said she would have a final report out later in July. And
okay.
So I don't have a new report now. She was going to be, she said she wanted to wait till the end of after the year and put everything together for the end of July.
Okay.
Okay, so thank you, Dick. So no treasurer's report. And
Right.
Tom, if I could try to summarize that list of things you just proposed adding to the agenda. The only one, aside from the treasurer's report, that I wrote down was the board retreat date. You want to kind of talk about a meeting schedule for next year. You want to do something with the 7 principles bylaw, but I think maybe perhaps you agreed that that's already on the agenda. We don't need to discuss it separately or add an agenda item. So I really only have those 2 things. What else? So, in a summary.
Well, there was this, wanted to recognize that there was a submission of a replacement email policy to
Oh,
be.
just so
considered for the next-
recognize in order to get it on the agenda for next year? I
No,
mean,
to
next
be-
month, read not
for
email
the
policy.
next regularly scheduled meeting of the board.
Gotcha, gotcha.
And you all have that, so it'd be a matter of considering it and then being able to talk about it. And then just a list of things to suggest that the next board be willing to consider and to have on their agenda for the next calendar year.
Okay. So why don't we get this agendas? So the last thing was a list of items to consider for
Yeah,
next year.
we can't direct the next board, but we can urge them to consider these things. And we have previously discussed all of these items. All four of the items, and the one of them will be whether there's any way that the congregation wants to recognize the 7 principles outside of the bylaw, which failed.
Mhm. So, okay, I can also share, like Dick, that there's no treasurer's update, that there's also no, on item 9, under 9A, a possible legacy society meeting report. Karen's on vacation, Dorn Steele's on vacation now too, replied to me about that while I was on vacation, and so I didn't go to her second Sue Sterrett, so we don't really have anybody to report on that.
Okay.
That'll have to be on in July or later, to get an update on that. So I think we probably have room in the agenda to do these essentially next year's board logistical stuff, the retreat date and a meeting schedule. I would put those last if we get through the rest of the agenda. It's just my thought. Definitely recognize the email policy sent. That shouldn't take too long. You can kind of incorporate that in the rest of the discussion about email policy. And then a list of items that we want to pass along, I suppose, hopefully pass along to next year's board to work on. I think that shouldn't take too long. We can do that too. So, anything else on the agenda, added to the agenda, changes to the agenda? Okay. Then hearing no further discussion, we'll go forward with that agenda and try to get done here in an hour and a half, as we always try to do. That has been this year's board's goal. So the next item is to approve our May minutes that were sent out a couple times now, I think, and haven't changed. And thanks again to Marilyn for putting those together for us. So any changes or updates to the May 29th meeting minutes? Okay, hearing no changes, those meeting minutes are approved. And we are zipping along now. Todd, I think you're on the line. Is there anything you'd like to share with us at the end of our fiscal year, end of our board year?
Yes. Well, first of all, I want to, personally say welcome to Justin Bell and Cindy Fine as our new board members. Welcome and thank you so much for taking on this role. It's great to have you and look forward to the next few years ahead. And also I'll say hi to my friends Mike and Ann, since these days we communicate via text and over some of the beautiful pictures you send me from the beautiful places you're staying, but it's good to see you both in person. So thanks for being here. And then I also, Betsy, I just cannot thank you enough for being our board president for the past year, stepping into a position that I don't think anybody ever wants to be the board president. It's like, yeah, I'll serve on the board, but I don't want to run the thing, but you really stepped in and stepped up and really appreciate you doing so for
I second that.
our congregation. Yeah, so you've
Thank
got
you.
seconds and thirds, and I think everybody is equally as grateful to you for all you've done for us this past year. So thank you so much.
My pleasure.
Yeah, and I too am on vacation as of now. for between now and the next week. I'm going to be in the board meeting for a bit. I do have actually some out of town guests. My friend Reverend Rick Davis and his wife are coming in, so they may be here anytime. But yeah, so I mean, you've all heard. You'll hear more from Dick's perspective in a bit. He was actually a delegate at the General Assembly, but as Mike and Ann mentioned informally when we were first gathering this afternoon, the UUA delegates voted about 80% to radically alter the Article 2, transforming the values of that organization into something that is unrecognizable compared to the 7 principles, and many of the key values in those principles have been eliminated, particularly anything referring to individuality or freedom or autonomy, democracy. Those sort of things are gone. So my opinion is that this is the end of the UUA, at least as we know it. It has become a different religion, an entirely new religion, and no longer reflects who we are. So we have to find a new way to move forward. I did send out about a 15-minute video earlier today to our congregation and to the NAUA, expressing my reflections on the matter. So that is all I have, unless there's any questions.
I'll talk more about it later, but I'll just tell you right now, that was at the center of the biggest controversy in the GA.
Okay, look forward to hearing more.
Yeah, we do, Dick. Thank you. Thanks, Todd. So the couple of items that I have under President's Update are just a tiny bit about what our board officers do. Thank you for the gratitude for taking on the job. Like you say, Todd, everybody's like, yeah, sure, I'll be on the board, but I don't want to be the president. But I want to publicly put that job back in a box. It's not that bad, you know. It's and I would be happy to both share the load Lynn did with me. Catherine has done it with the previous presidents, and also share all of my templates and procedures. So they're all in my head at this point, but they can be written down with anybody who wants to be the president, which is largely just facilitating and helping to organize this meeting, really just facilitating this meeting, you know, and obviously that ball gets dropped a little bit. There's a lot of other people that do a lot of the work to make that happen. Most of Todd's staff, the staff of our church, really pull it off with the links and the communications and so forth. So not that heavy a lift. So board president is definitely something we're looking for. The vice president, which Doug has filled in for us this year, is pretty much what it sounds like. Kind of stand in to help facilitate meetings when the president can't. So pretty straightforward, and also attend every agenda setting meeting. That's kind of the deal. So look, we've typically gotten those done within half an hour, setting the agenda, usually about a week before the board, with a rotating board member. So that's a relatively in the box job too. And then there's secretary, which Tom has filled for us this year, and Dick as the treasurer. So those are our board officers. I don't know if there's anything anybody else wants to add about what those positions are. Anybody that filled them wants to share anything about those roles, would be great.
Go ahead, Tom, and then I'll jump in.
Okay, and to that point, I think sometime within the last week, I did send out the bylaws that pertain to the Board of Trustees and highlighted in blue the responsibilities of each of those 4 officers that were just mentioned. So something to contemplate and think about, because probably in the July meeting, we probably should have one. That will be when we'll end up selecting officers among the 7 of us.
Yeah, and what I wanted to add, for anybody thinking of perhaps stepping into that role, that the board president is not a church president. We've had some board presidents that think they're the church president, that somehow they've been elected by the congregation to run the church. It really is presiding, presidenting, if you will, over the board meetings. The board comes up, the board has at least created a way for the board to determine what the meetings are going to be about, what will be on the agenda, and that sort of thing. But someone needs to sort of guide the flow of the work of the board, and that is really what the president is doing, sort of presiding over the work you're doing together. So to as Betsy was mentioning, really downplay what seems like an overwhelming position. Having had a terrible experience with the last president who thought they were president of the church, I guarantee you, if you get out of line and start to act like the president of the church, I will say something. So we'll help keep that reminder alive from now on.
Thanks, Todd. Any other thoughts there? Again, this is just like several of the things on our agenda. We're just getting a little preview of when your board year starts, getting ready for the new board year to start, getting ready to hit the ground running for the new team. So that's just a little bit about board officers. The other thing under President's update here was the 7th principal bylaw amendment post-annual meeting debrief, our annual meeting. That was the purpose of this agenda item. And this is really an open discussion. There's really no particular action that we're trying to undertake here specifically today. But it seemed that it would be worthwhile as a group to discuss what happened along the lines of that 7 principal bylaw that we as a board crafted and put before the congregation, but it was ultimately rejected. So it seemed to have a lot to do with, well, anyway, I'm going to let the rest of you guys remember what that was, and we can kind of go through a thought process on that, essentially just a debrief. And Dick, some of this may overlap a little, perhaps, with what you learned at the UUA. I don't know. Seems okay if those discussions merge a bit. They're probably related, but
they all merge. Yes, they all merge.
indeed they do. So anyway, so this is open discussion now. And what time is it? It's 10 till, and I think we're quite on track here. So we're okay. We're okay. Let's go ahead. We have a little time. Go ahead. I can't see hands raised. You guys are not usually.
Is this about the 7 principle or whatever, or about anything?
Well, Tom does have his hand raised. Go ahead, Tom.
Okay.
Well, I the way you phrased it, it was, is there any kind of fallout or redirection or suggestions about the 7 principles? And I wrote down some comments, and it seemed like there was a number of people who just simply said they don't belong in the bylaws. One of the suggestions that came up in the conversation kind of was in the direction of, at one point, not putting them in the bylaws. Would the congregation be interested in adopting them in some sense or context, and possibly having them formulated into a plaque, not unlike the flags that we have hanging in our sanctuary, and with a notation below, adopted by the congregation at such and such a congregational meeting, to give some recognition for them without formally having them in the bylaws. So I thought that was an interesting context suggestion, although, so, that seems like something for the next board to think about, maybe holding a congregational conversation, not a formal congregational meeting, and see what people think, or what the suggestions are outside of a bylaw situation.
Yeah, I think that my memory of the meeting, it really felt like a couple of these items were important to the congregation, but really there wasn't enough time to process in in an annual meeting. I think the idea of having congregational conversations about the seven, what do we want to do with the seven principles? I mean, to me, it's enough to display them somewhere, well, or some places where people can remember them. But for some, they may want to do, as Tom says, have some sort of formal adoption of them. But again, I think there needs to be conversation around that, as well as conversation around what is our relationship to the Unitarian Universalist Association at this point. And that is something I think we probably need to get on fairly early in this church year, so that there might be multiple conversations and opportunities for people to think about it. So I would think that should really be the board's focus, not so much having the conversations as a board, but figuring out how to allow the congregation to be more informed, more aware, give them time to think about this, and perhaps we can all come to some sort of consensus on where we go from here.
Yeah, and that essentially was 2 of the 4 items I said that we should urge the next board to figure out how to have that involves the whole congregation. So.
And so I had thought about that. I think as long as we're a part of the UUA, it'd be important to adopt the 7 principles in some manner or other. It doesn't have to be in the bylaws, just to distinguish ourselves from what the UUA is doing. That'd be probably more a symbolic thing, unless we want to make it long term. But for symbolism, it'd be good to say no, we're not following the UUA lead on these things.
Any other thoughts or memories, excuse me, from what happened at the annual meeting?
I'd be curious if Mike and Ann have anything to say, since you guys made it a special point to be here tonight, having just learned the news.
There we go. Takes us a minute to get ourselves unmuted. Yeah.
Well, certainly part of what drew us to, I mean, I come from a Mennonite historical upbringing and from a Catholic background. So we come with somewhat diverse religious histories. And what drew us to the UU Church were the 7 principles, and the respect for individuality and the respect for individual thinking and rational thought. So to me, I'm very interested in the Spokane congregation specifically to continue acknowledging that again in difference from the UUA.
Because we live full time in an RV, we travel a lot. You know, we're in Oregon right now, but we were in Bend for the winter. You know, we go to UU churches when we're on the road, but it's gotten to the point where it's like, which kind of UU church is this going to be? And we have found it challenging to find a UU church that still upholds the 7 principles. And so for me, it's real important that Spokane say loudly, and, you know, because there's now this divergence between the UUA and the NAUA, as somebody who goes to different churches sometimes, it's nice to know that the Spokane church, where we stand. And I think the 7 principles is a way to say that we stand with the inherent worth and dignity of every person, not something else. That's comforting to me, and important that we declare that clearly for people coming into our church as visitors to know, and for us as a congregation to know where we stand.
As we've probably said enough, but thanks for asking. for our opinion as we've traveled and looked for churches that we could join to be a part of the community. We have always looked for one that was welcoming, acceptive of diverse views, and that the 7 principles epitomize that. So thank you.
Thank you.
I had another thought relevant to this, that this GA for a long time, I've been trying to figure out what's the real reason for this hostility to keeping the 7 principles. And so I think I finally found out the real reason. And that is that there are certain very influential members of Drum, if you know what that group is, who've decided that the 7 principles need to be jettisoned because they're part of white supremacy culture. And I've seen quite a few quotes, not saying that exactly, but implying that, using that kind of language.
Yeah, I think that's true. I mean, if you look at Sophia Bentoncourt's statement about human dignity being part of white supremacy that comes from Kant, which is not true.
Right.
Supremacy, that would lead us to that conclusion. But I think more importantly, Dick, is just that anything to do with individual freedom, individual dignity, thinking for yourself, that is an obstacle to any kind of organization that wants to control speech and control ideas. So
right.
You've got to get rid of those 7 principles because they're not following them.
It occurs to me too. So Tom pointed out that this was something we were probably going to put on our list for the next year's board to consider. You guys are probably hearing lots of things along those lines. We want you to do strategic plans and UUA withdrawals, but it occurs to me that a lot of emotion and energy and interest, just like Ann and Mike said, and Dick had said, and all of us have felt around the 7 principles could be the needed and awaited, and also the recent behavior of the UUA could be the needed and awaited vector for really galvanizing our exit out of the UUA. I mean, not that, Todd, you haven't suffered enough at their hands, and we've seen plenty, but we've just been kind of, working up to it. Anyway, just a thought for next year.
I might add that, and I got an email from Rebecca in Cincinnati, and she asked me some questions, which I passed on to Todd. He might elaborate on that. But, the process for withdrawing from UUA is literally a congregational vote, which in our congregation is a 2/3 vote of those present and voting at a meeting in which there's a quorum. And then just simply sending a letter saying it's been resolved and voted on by our congregation that we are withdrawing from UUA. That was what the bylaws said a couple of years ago, and I don't think that part's changed. So it's a pretty simple process, but we would have to take a 2/3 vote agree that we would do that. So that's kind of the hurdle that we would be looking at.
But we also, I sorry to barge right in, but we also have a lot of other things to consider, particularly related to our employees, staff, who have some of their benefits still connected to the UUA. So our personnel team would need to gather some information with the help of the staff as to how they want to go forward with that.
Yeah.
Hey, I'm on that team, Lynn.
I know.
Your husband and I. So,
yes.
You just say the word for a well-defined task like that. We'll go figure it out.
Yeah.
Yeah. And that would be part of a congregational meeting. It's just not going to be an up or down vote with no conversation. All of the pros and cons would have to be thoroughly aired, and that being one of them, which we've already discussed a little bit as a board.
Yeah, but just like any organization or business, the UUA does not provide benefits to our employees. We do. So what the UUA does is provide a service to sort of corral those benefits and offer them, in a group context, so that you get more for your money. That's what we would have to replace if we were to you know, to pull out of the UUA. But you know, that's not necessarily so. We may still be able to be part of the same group since we're already in it. So we have to look into that stuff. But
And I know, having started at one point a small business that we did when we were RVing, that there are small business organizations that provide as a group similar services to what the UUA is providing for us. So there are answers out there.
Dick, you have your hand up. Oh, you're muted, Dick.
Yeah, one more thing on the 7 principles and hostility to the 7 principles. And at this General Assembly, there were proposals for 4 amendments to what the Article 2 Commission had proposed. And one of those was to add a new value under the rubric peace, and the other was to add a new value under the rubric reason. And both of those were turned down because the right people did not speak in favor of those. And that's the way it's, if the right people like speak in favor of something, it's going to pass by 3/4 of a vote. Maybe if they speak against, they'll lose by 3/4 of a vote. It was kind of shocking, some of the arguments against reason and peace that I heard. For example, one of the reasons against peace was they said, well, you know, there was violence in these demonstrations after the George Floyd incident. Like there were some things in Seattle and Portland and some pretty nasty things. And sometimes violence is necessary. You know, the violence is the voice of the people or something like that. And as a lifelong advocate for nonviolent resistance, that really, in fact, they didn't even realize that peace actually includes nonviolent resistance, according to Martin Luther King's definition. But they were finding all kinds of reasons not to vote for peace. And peace had been the 6th principle before the world community. And of course, reason, that really, they're really against that because they misread Kant, as Todd just pointed out, and they don't even understand the difference between reason and logic. Reason is part of the scientific method because it doesn't just use Aristotelian logic, you know, A implies B implies C, that kind of thing. It also looks at the assumptions or hypotheses behind your reasoning and the evidence. And the reasoning process includes logical reasoning plus evidence plus assumptions. And a lot of people don't realize if the reasoning doesn't work, usually it's because of bad assumptions or bad evidence. But these people are so ignorant, it was just crazy.
Well, that's really scary when the right people can express what they think and then everybody votes in line. That's very Trumpian, it's very cultish, and that is something that is of grave concern to me. I mean, I'm not part of the UUA anymore, but
and the number of people voting that way is about 3/4 or more. It depends. I thought the final vote would be about 3/4. It turned out to actually be even more than that, 80%. But on some of the amendments, it was between 70 and 80%. That was the swing, depending on whether, like Cheryl Walker, who was co-chair of the Article 2 Commission, spoke in favor or against.
Wow.
Yeah, that kind of thing. And UUs used to think for themselves. That's another thing that's very shocking to me.
Yeah.
Okay, well, this was just a discussion, so I think anything else, anybody? I'm about ready to wrap that one up. If there isn't, move on to email stuff, policies. Anything else on 7 principles?
Did you want to get into the Article 3 later?
If you would, Dick, if since we've had a general discussion about 7 principles, let's stick with the agenda and we'll let you have a little turn on
Article
that.
3 is very important. I'll talk about
Absolutely. I thought it was Article 2. That's what I put
well,
in
no,
the agenda. Maybe
Article 3 is
3.
the one where the rubber hits the road. That's where you
okay.
that's where you might lose congregational polity.
Well, whatever it is, we want to hear about it from you, Dick. So, but if you could hang on to that for just a sec, and we'll get through these other agenda items. So, we are now, folks, on item 6. And since we amended the agenda, what I would like to do here before item 6, Lynn, before I have you do the shared ministry discussion, is to, I guess, Tom, all you really wanted to do is to point out that a alternative email policy has been formulated by Doug and Tom, I think, and it's been sent around to us all to review and look at and potentially consider. We'll try to get it on the agenda, I think is the plan, to discuss next month.
Yeah.
But at this point, we really just want to point out that it was sent out and have you look at it.
Okay, and just let me give you the background, a little bit of background on that. After as you all will remember, I made a motion to rescind what was there. And that motion had some abstentions and some people in favor and some people against, but it didn't have enough in order to rescind it, which required a 2/3 vote. But there was quite a bit of discussion. And out of that, what Doug then contacted me and said, maybe we can collaborate on something that takes a benefit of the conversation that was had. And I got an email from Dick Burkhart that had a suggestion. And I actually used the chat program and went through 5 or 6 questions about email policies for nonprofit boards of directors or trustees. And out of that, and then when we got together, we put together something that seemed to reflect conversation, input from Dick, input from an exercise with the chat program, and something that we wanted people to be able to look at instead of just have something brought before us and expect us to act on something. So that's what you all got. And I think when Doug sent it out, he sent out the existing policy as it's formulated in our policy and procedures document, and then a revised one that would be essentially an amendment to what's there. So that's what we wanted to introduce, make sure that you all knew that you got that email and that it would be something that would be on the agenda for the next regular meeting, which I suppose would be July.
Did you say something about an amendment in there, Tom?
Well, yeah, because the policy that's there now is in was adopted into
Right.
the policy and procedures document. So what we're proposing is that section of the policy and procedures document be amended, not rescinded, because that failed. So now
Okay, but
okay,
understood.
But
but the document that you sent was a wholesale replacement of the entire section, I believe, and that's how I read it in the email.
Yeah. You got
Okay.
what's there and what we suggested replacing it with,
Right.
which is essentially an amendment. And I have a deletion addition kind of a document if that were if that were necessary, but it's effectively it's an amendment.
Yeah, and okay, thank you. And I wanted to thank both of you for putting that together and also for including both the original and the newly proposed. It was really easy, even in the car, to read them both and compare. And it's not, I guess, a discussion I'll be partaking in. I won't be on the board in July, but my quick review of it, which I guess I'll express here since I did look at it, was that the major difference was the old version or the currently in place version of the email policy prohibits, or it's not quite so strong as to prohibit, but it asks us not to deliberate in email. And the new policy asks us not to make decisions in email. And I guess since I'm already talking and going to provide my opinion, deliberation in email, I believe, is what we want to avoid. And and that's a better word to keep in our policy, deliberation, to avoid deliberation. And there's a lot of reasons for that, but one to share, transparency being one of them, but one to share that may not be as obvious to all of us is that this goes against what I said about it's easy to be president of the board. It is a little tricky to be on the board and could potentially demand a lot of your time, especially if you're reading email and deliberating there. And working people really is still not here, right? It creates a higher bar for them to participate in our board activities if a lot of the activities take place outside of the meeting. So that's just a plug for do not deliberate, nor make decisions in email, not just keep decisions out of email as a board. So in addition to what we've already talked about as transparency.
That certainly was one of the points, and I think what we had suggested was the replacement of the word prohibition of deliberations via email, changing it to prohibition of decisions via email, with the implication that a deliberation is totally different from a discussion, an exchange of ideas leading up to a meeting at which there would be a decision made. So that's a subtle difference that I think we were trying to focus on. Which brings us to Lynn, I guess.
Yep. Lynn, are you there?
I am here. Yeah, I do see Dick has his hand up, but I would like to say that I'd really like you to hear what I'd like to bring forward from the shared ministry before you make any decisions or even have further discussions or possible revisions sent out via email to consider. I think it's important that you hear what we have to say before you start changing that policy. So can I go ahead, or did you need to speak first, Dick?
I may just say one quick thing. Tom mentioned my input, which doesn't seem to have gotten in there.
It is in there.
And I don't know, but that is that what I propose is that it would be okay for if a member of the congregation contacts a board member and wants to say, I have an issue, could the board do anything about this? And they could sort of talk it over, and I think that should be acceptable to have that kind of communication between a congregation member and a board member to serve to set the parameters of what might be possible and not possible, how to go about it. And so they can, if that person wants to go further, help them navigate the system and whatever.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So that's enough.
Yeah, it's in there, Dick. It's not verbatim because it had to be kind of formatted to go with the style of the policy and procedures protocol.
Mm-hmm.
Well, it was our intention that this not really get discussed today, but that we just put this out here and then we will deal with it in the next meeting or the next several meetings or whatever it takes.
Right. Yeah, good point, Doug. So we're
Lynn should Lynn should rest assured that we want to hear everything they have to say and we'll be eagerly awaiting it and
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, okay, so I'll go ahead then. I do want to say I'm sorry there wasn't a shared ministry representative at the May meeting to engage in conversation with you. I have taken the time, though, to review that recording where there was board discussion questioning the importance of that recently adopted email policy. And I also want to assure you that the shared ministry team does not at all think there are any secret meetings or any devious attempts by the board to overthrow the church via email or anything going on that really shouldn't be going on. We never had that intention of trying to stop important communication about meetings or agendas or whatever. But we have become, however, concerned about the transparency of conversations when a board member or board members are involved, as well as the number and frequency of email threads circulating on various topics that are too numerous for many of us to keep up with at any level of depth of understanding or consideration. Initially, we had hoped to resolve the issue with the implementation of this new policy that we sent forward, which the board voted to adopt unanimously in April. Our intention was to address the specific behavior without singling out any one trustee, but unfortunately that approach was not very successful in curbing that practice. So now we feel very compelled to address the issue more directly to seek a resolution with you for the betterment of the congregation and for our staff. The specific concerns, the approach to the approach to the email communication while serving in the role of a trustee. Following a more thoughtful review, and now in an attempt to be really specific, open, clear, and respectful, Dick Gammon and I, and Todd, on behalf of the shared ministry, have identified 3 really key points that we want to elaborate on with all of you. The first one is a constant conversation that goes on between meetings. There's a belief among some that there should be constant conversation with interested congregants on just about any topic. The 7 principles, budgets come up, bylaws, the endowment team, operations, communication policies, the coffee cart, the memorial garden. Some of these things come up between meetings, often initiated through email threads. While engagement with the congregation is crucial, the frequency and informality of these email exchanges is leading to confusion and lack of clarity about the official stance of the board, as well as confusion to what even constitutes board business, which is actually a very narrow scope. It's important that our communication be structured and timely, with clear and concise messaging that aligns with the board's decisions made during your meetings. The second point is a dual role in email communications. There's also a belief that it is acceptable to send emails, sometimes as a trustee and other times just as a congregant. Given the responsibilities of serving a 3-year term as a trustee, it is vital that there be a clear distinction between your personal opinions and the official communications as a trustee. This dual role is blurring those lines, and it misleads recipients about the source and the authority of the information that's being shared. Consistency in your role for your term is key to maintaining a trust in you and the transparency of your conversations for all members of the congregation. And that leads to our third point, and that's the effectiveness of email as a communication tool. We believe that email is an effective communication tool for sharing agendas, minutes, subcommittee documents, verifying meeting dates, coordinating schedules, etc., those kinds of things. However, starting new conversations on topics of concern to a few congregants or extending conversations that occurred in any church meeting quickly becomes problematic. The selective inclusion of members in these email conversations means that not all the congregants are equally informed, and the growing threads lead to misunderstandings about who has read what information, who is informed about what, and who among you is being influenced in your thought processes about potential decisions you do need to make as a board member. Additionally, lengthy individual emails and threads of conversations are disruptive to the workflow of our staff as they try to wade through an enormous amount of text trying to identify what's applicable to their job. In 2020, the newly elected Board of Trustees became deeply committed to holding open meetings with adequate advance notice, no unscheduled or unannounced conversations with a few members about potential board matters. This was essential at the time in an effort to rebuild diminished trust that had occurred and it remains no less essential today. Trust is so easily lost with confusing communication. We understand that there may be resistance to changing current email practices, and while it is always very unfortunate to consider losing a dedicated trustee to resignation, it's important that our communication policies serve the best interest of our entire congregation. We encourage the board to uphold this policy and to hold each other accountable for it. Our priority must remain the clarity, unity, and effective communication within our community. So I thank you for your attention. I appreciate it. I hope you'll take into consideration these words before you make any decision to change the email policy that we put before you and that you voted unanimously to adopt in April. I'm happy to respond to your questions. I'm sure Todd is too.
I think it would be helpful if since you read those remarks, if those were communicated to the board so that they would be able to absorb those while they absorb the suggestions that came from Doug and me, which, as I'm recalling them and looking at them while you were reading, are quite a bit consistent, but a little bit inconsistent with what you've just said. So I encourage you to share those written comments.
I'm happy to, I can send it in a, do you want me to send it in an email?
Yeah.
Unless you want to go around and hand deliver it to everybody. I mean, this is part of what seems to be bothering some people on the shared ministry team. Almost to the point of what I would describe as an obsession. But that's a kind word, but I don't know how else to say it. There are, and I'm the one at which most of this of the commentary that you made is pointed at, and I'm fully aware of that. And I just don't see the evil that you are pointing to, and the descriptions that you have alluded to in your concerns. I just don't see them, but other people may. To me, email is a communication tool that is similar to a texting between people and or having a conversation with people. As an example, I just responded to a congregant who asked me, I assume as a trustee or either that as the parliamentary advisor, where is the mission of the church written? And I spent about a half an hour going through documents, looking at documents and providing that person with some information about that. Addressing the bylaws, the policy and procedures, the website, and that sort of thing. And I certainly would hope that that is not under your umbrella of prohibited things that a trustee should not do. But, that's just one example. And I think that's consistent with what you said, Dick, as far as responding. But at any rate, I think you need to share what you have written down so people can look at it and then look at the document that Doug and I have proposed and see whether it has outstanding issues.
So I had a thought about this. The most obvious thing is that each board member should have a board email address and use that when they're a board member and not their own personal email. And then for any kind of board business, let's say if you're doing something on bylaws, it should be identified who are the people who are working on that business, who's the temporary subcommittee or permanent subcommittee. And then the people who are doing that work could communicate among themselves on that particular business by email without having to email the whole board or other people. So now I think we maybe need to be a lot more intentional about who needs to be involved in any particular conversation. And that should be a designated group. If the board says we want you three to work on this topic, then those three people should have at least a distribution list among themselves, and they should have board emails to use there.
Well, as an example, to build on that, Dick, and I see your hand, Todd, and I will stop. But for instance, that email that I just described that I sent out to this congregant, because I was responding somewhat as an official person, whether it was parliamentary advisor or whether it was a trustee, I copied all of the board people with that email, so they would all know what was sent out. And if they had objections to it or follow up, they could have followed up. Now, that's partially what I think the shared ministry team is objecting to, is that somebody is burdened by the sharing of that kind of information. So, you know.
Another possibility is that what you did took a half an hour, and maybe that should be the job of the board secretary or someone like that. And you wouldn't have to be.
I am the secretary.
Yeah, okay. Then that's your job then, right? So so board roles need to be clarified too, I think, a lot.
Yeah, if I can just jump in here. You know, my concern with communication is that we have a commitment to our congregation for the board to be transparent when it is conducting business, which is why this board did not meet the other day when there wasn't a link that had been made available to the entire congregation.
And we didn't have
but go ahead, Tom. I'm sorry.
Well, we didn't have a quorum. That was where we started.
Well, you didn't have a quorum, but also the link hadn't gone out, right? So we have a commitment to doing business publicly unless the board decides to go into an executive session, at which time it would announce to the congregation why it's going into that executive session, and not make any decisions inside it, but to come out and openly make any decisions about whatever is talked about. So it's that's pretty strict commitment to the transparency. So the problem with board members discussing over email is that you have engaged in board business without inviting the congregation. The problem with having conversations with individuals or a small group of individuals about board business is that the entire congregation has not been invited into that conversation. Again, violating the commitment to transparency. So that's really what the policy is trying to do is maintain, as Betsy said at the start of this, to maintain that commitment that was so violated not too long ago. Tom, you remember well, 5 years ago, what had happened with the board that just pretty much ran around doing almost everything in secret. And so, you know, the boards that followed that really worked hard to reestablish this and put policies in place for themselves, but did not have an email policy, a formal email policy. So that is where this is born from, and I think those are the concerns that have to be dealt with. Whatever you decide. The idea to me of saying to certain people, you know, everybody put your email out there and then you can talk to individuals. I think listening to individuals and talking with them in depth about issues is very different. Whereas, you know, listening and saying, well, you know, this is something that you can come to a board meeting and bring it up, something to that effect, which is the process, right? That's how you guide them through the process. But going into in-depth, whether it's in email, which has not been announced, or the entire congregation is not included on, or going into conversations deeply with individuals without inviting the entire congregation, to me violates the intention of having open board meetings, conducting board business and open board meetings.
There is no doubt about board business being handled in board business. I think there's a possibility of a difference in opinion about what is board business. Board business is something that appears on an agenda, and there's going to be a discussion with the board and probably leading to a decision. You know, there's a problem here because during this past year, we have restricted ourselves for the most part to 1.5 hour board meetings, and we had 10 board meetings. That is 15 hours for a body to deliberate and make decisions that affect about 175 or 80 people. That there's got to be some level of conversation, at least in my opinion, that has to take place at times outside of a meeting so we can bring to a meeting that the public's invited to in order to have a full deliberation and discussion, open discussion. So it just puzzles me to think that every single thing of any minor or maximum importance can be confined to a 15 hours out of an entire calendar year. To me, it's borderline absurd.
This is how boards are conducted, though, and I mean, it may be that you have to then, one of the issues the board has before it is to come up with a definition of what is and isn't board business.
Very possibly so.
Because I think that's a very narrow definition of board business.
If it's on the agenda, it's board business, black and white.
Well, but if it's something that is as the original policy said, something that would potentially be covered in the board, like discussions of you know, do we leave the UUA? You know, those sort of things may not be on the agenda, but it would be something that the board would have to deal with eventually, right? So that would be board, by my definition, board business.
Yeah, and that's just exactly what I proposed, that make sure that we have that on the next on the next board's calendar for the year, that has to be something to be discussed. But as far, you know, these conversations are going on all around the congregation right now.
Which is fine. I'm not talking about stopping the conversation, the congregations from having conversations.
Good.
It's about people who are on the board who have to actually make a lot of decisions around these, having private conversations that are not transparent, or conversations with a few individuals that are not open to other individuals, or communicating in an email chain, you know, to persuade, to make arguments about board business that are not, the congregation is not privy to.
I would agree with that, and
It would be similar to having a conversation in person at church with 1 or 2 or 3 people as a board member, and then emailing a few more people and including board members to that conversation, but not others, right? It just, and then everybody who responds waters down that message a little bit more, and a thread gets longer and longer, and nobody knows who's talking about what. So, and this
sounds
is
like a
definitely,
conversation.
Pardon me?
Sounds like a conversation that is taking place. It just happens to be in writing rather than verbal, because we no longer are a group of people who can all get together because we're so used to doing things by Zoom and by email.
Well,
Yes, but we're on the board, Tom. I think maybe that's where you're headed, Lynn, and I apologize for cutting you off, but it sounded like from Todd's description, and that is, you're right. Communications and threads get murky, can't tell which way they go, and that's just part of conversation, Tom. Absolutely, that's part of conversation. We're all in a very special position on the Board of Trustees right now, and we have to talk differently, and we have to communicate differently. We're much more constrained now. That's just how it is. For a transparent board, it has to be different.
I agree with transparency. I think probably just like the definition of what's business, that there's a question about transparency and where it applies and when it applies, how it applies. So
Yeah.
There's going to be certain things that we're not going to that we're going to disagree on. I hope,
Yeah.
with respect, but I sense a modest amount of disagreement on some critical issues.
I thought of another point is, many boards I've been on the agenda, they have a place near the end for new business. And I think, Tom, some of the things you talked about earlier really should have been under a new business item of the agenda. So I think I recommend that we have a new business item, and then that could And often those are, you may do something new business right then, but often it's a suggestion of new business that will go in the next board meeting. And right this time of year, you made several suggestions that would apply to the next board meeting or the meeting after that. And so I think we need that kind of new business thing, and then it makes it official too.
That's a
That's-
great suggestion. Great suggestion, Dick. We already have unfinished, what do we have down there right now, Tom? Unfinished and old and
Unfinished
new.
business.
Yeah, new,
Yeah.
new.
And there could be new also.
Mhm.
The problem that has arisen, as you well know, Betsy, in some of these times, they're at the bottom of the agenda, just like the items of, when we're going to meet, when we're going to meet in times, and they get left off. And sometimes I noticed, I went back and looked at the agenda, sometimes they've been postponed from 2 to 3 minutes, or from 2 to 3 different sets of agendas, because we don't have enough time to talk about them. So the idea of everything taking place in a board meeting without having some precursor of some conversation that it's important enough to put at the top of the agenda and the bottom of the agenda, that is just highlighting some of the issues that I'm trying to make.
Well, we do put things at the top of the agenda. We do prioritize our agendas in our agenda setting meetings. And true, things fall off the bottom. Sometimes that happens.
And most new business items would then go into the next regular agenda. Unless
Yes,
they're just real
yes.
short things you can do right now.
Right.
Which gives people a chance to know what's going to come up on the next agenda, so they can decide whether or not they're planning to come or able to wanting to come to be part of that conversation.
I couldn't have said it better. I couldn't have said that better.
Mhm.
Well, I have said my piece, except for how much I love Tom Mosier and consider him a good friend.
Mhm.
And it's now up to the board to take this on. I really appreciate Lynn representing the thoughts of the shared ministry team and being so honest too. And you know what our concerns are and how we feel. So thank you for letting us be part of your ongoing conversation about this.
Good.
Thank you all for preparing that, Dick and Todd and Lynn for reading it out to us. I much appreciate that.
And I would like to see the written remarks that you read from. That would be good.
Lynn, it would actually be it would actually be kind of nice for Marilyn when she's making the minutes, if she had your written remarks. That would be good too.
You're gonna make me tidy them up, guys. They're just sort of scrambled notes, but all right, I'll do that.
Thank you, Lynn.
It won't be word for word, probably.
Thank you. Okay, anything else? Team, ready to move on to our next item? I think, Doug, I think you did say you had been to the ops team meeting, had a little report for us to share. Doug, if you're still with us.
I think there's an image there of a chair. There he is.
Oh, you went to get a drink.
Yes.
Looks like a gin and tonic to me.
Sometimes a good thing.
Is it my turn?
Yeah.
It's your turn. It's your turn, Doug.
Yeah, I apologize. I'm at my rental property and I just fixed my or got my tenant's problem fixed and so he fixed me a gin and tonic.
Aw,
He's a
nice.
great tenant.
That's a great tenant.
So you ready for the report on the ops team?
Yep.
Okay, so I just emailed the report that I have to everybody there except Ann and Mike, and I think, and so you can look at that. I can read the whole thing if you want me to. Or do you think it's necessary? In the interest of time,
Oh,
No,
Betsy?
no.
I'm
No.
looking. I'm looking for it.
Well, how about a
Yeah,
little,
if everybody looks for their last email almost, or perhaps last, you'll find it.
okay. Mhm.
You can summarize. We can move quick. You're right. We're
Just
unless
give a
you're
brief overview, and then we'll read the details.
agreed.
Well, yeah, well, it won't take that long to read it. That'll be about it's, so the items discussed at the June 11 meeting, was that the annual meeting was agreed upon went well, and would be a good idea for the Board of Trustees to have better guidance for setting up the annual meeting in the future. The creation of an annual meeting planning timeline calendar similar to the budget process. So this would be something that would guide the board and would be, written and visible, and so there was just a feeling that that would help the board and make the annual meetings go better in the future. Then the treasurer situation, that we need maybe an accountant to help the treasurer, and let's see. That's basically, so just an issue about treasurer and qualifications, I guess. Buildings and ground, new toilets in, parking lots fixed, posts fixed. Budget and fundraising, as everybody knows, it came up short, but there have been several last minute pledges, and these, along with gifts from deceased members, is the new budget looking somewhat better, under $10,000 short. And then we need to ramp up fundraising, and the ops team is asking the board to step up and make this a project priority this new year. And team of volunteers is needed. It includes board members. The Board of Trustees should sponsor, plan, and promote these events with the support of the ops team and office staff. So that's it.
You know what I heard in that annual meeting prep thing was that we need a procedure. That's what we would call them, or a job aid for the
Yeah.
board for
Right,
annual meeting
Yeah.
prep. Yeah.
Yeah, that was yes, that's well put.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a great idea.
Yeah, regarding that, there has been some like work with that before, and sometimes it juggled between what was the staff thinking the board was going to do and what was the board thinking the staff was going to do. So somehow it isn't like us going to be able to develop a plan without having help from the staff. And we do need to separate out and figure out what it is, and then have some kind of a document or protocol that defines responsibilities, because I was certainly aware of who does what issues. And the other thing about the treasurer, help me out here, Lynn. When we were redoing the bylaws revision, there was conversation about us needing to have a regular commentary to the board, and that was part of what led, I think, to us saying that the treasurer would be a board member. Now, of course, we can change bylaws if that isn't working out, but there was some conversation that we had, and fill in here around the edge, that so much of the bookkeeping was done by our bookkeeper and our operations manager, that the job of simply reporting things to the board on a regular basis or quarterly basis was something that would just be kind of following what was developed by the bookkeeper and the operations manager. And that's how, I think, as I recall, we ended up with a treasurer being on the board, so there'd be commentary to the board. Now, if that's not working out, then then we need to go a different direction, which would mean either a professional accountant in addition to the operations manager and the bookkeeper, or we need to find that volunteer, as we've had in the past, going back several years. We've had, treasurers that did have an accounting background, who then served year after year after year until they burned out. So,
Oh, Todd has his hand.
Yeah, my Well, firstly, you know, the talk in the operations meeting was yes, that we would put that that agenda for you together for you for the board, so that you got, but basically you keep it on your calendar, right? So you'd have a board calendar, might just like you have a budget calendar, you'd have, you know, or you would have a budget calendar, you might have other calendars, but you might just look at that calendar every time you come up with your next agenda meeting and see if there's anything that needs to be included on it, right? But it'll come from the office. Rebecca will help put that together based on what she knows to be the calendar for when certain things should be done around the budget.
Well, in addition, supplementing that, Todd, Lynn, Lynn, you'll remember when you were president that you outlined a kind of a month-by-month calendar of things that the board needed to be constantly aware of. And I pulled that out once or twice at the beginning of this year. And because I had it, because I saved it, I knew the value of it. So we've got something like that you prepared, Lynn, as a guide for the board a couple of years ago. So we've got a starting point.
It's, I still have that. If you want me to send it to you, I can send that also. It's about like, when does the board set their priorities for the next year and all of that kind of stuff. Yeah. My understanding though, so when we initially were looking at that bylaw and putting the role of the treasurer together, we had a lot of conversation and we had some input from Todd talking about, you know, we have a bookkeeper, we have a person who, our operations manager, sets the budget and does all of that. We got handed, that first year I was on the board, we got handed a budget and asked to answer questions from the congregation prior to the annual meeting. We had a little table set up and I was terrified because I was like, I have no idea what questions I'm supposed to answer here, or could I even answer them? But and so it became pretty important, at least to me personally, to have somebody on the board who would be at that table with any other board member who didn't know how to talk about the budget, be available and ready to do such a thing if the congregation did have questions. Luckily, no one did at that time. However, it also came to our attention that according to my interpretation and Robert's interpretation of the RCW, you have to have a treasurer. You have to have a president, a secretary, and a treasurer on your board, on a nonprofit board. So it has to be one of you. That is interpreted differently according to Rebecca, is my understanding. Rebecca says that is not the case, but I don't know where she's reading that.
I think that's the case, yeah.
What I see is that you do have to have a treasurer that is a member of the board.
And that is distinct from the president.
And is distinct from the president, yes.
Yeah.
Hey, guys, can we
But I
talk about this some more next month? Dick, go ahead, finish your sentence. I want to give you time
I just wanted to say something too, is that why I ran into trouble this year was the last quarter. Because if Rebecca gives me quarter reports and she'll tell me what's going on with some of the particular items. But then in the last quarter, we have to put together a budget and figure out whether our shortfalls might be this year, a whole bunch of things. And I didn't get much transparency into that. You can't do that with quarter reports. You'd have to have very more closely spaced reports, which I tried to get some of. But you also need someone who knows how to interpret those reports. Because they say you're supposed to be at 90% this year. Oh, but maybe you don't really have to be at 90% because you get more at the end or something like that. You have to know what the history of those things is and how to interpret all that stuff. And there it gets a little trickier where if there's a treasurer, that person has to be working actually much more closely during the final quarter and than just the quarter reports would suggest.
Yeah, they're all really good points. I've been the treasurer too, and what you say is true about being able to interpret and working in the last quarter is the biggest hurdle for sure, Dick. So those are some things we probably should think about and address. if we
Yeah.
can.
So there should be a separate procedure just for that last quarter, or a separate protocol working with the treasurer, working with the staff and all.
It sounds like another procedure being suggested. Of course, we're always thinking of things to do for people, right? Right procedures. But Dick, I want to make sure we've only got about maybe 10 minutes in our time left. And you're the last, other than setting a date for our July meeting, your sort of report on Article 3, not Article 2, like it says in the agenda. Article 3 is what I think we want to hear about now. So I want to make sure we give you all the time we have or can to share with us what you learned at the UUA meeting.
Yeah, so let me go over a bit. It was the general session 2, where there was a report from the bylaws renewal team. I think that's what it's called. And their eventual plan is to rewrite all the bylaws. Article 2 was just the first one. But the next one on their agenda, which they intend to work on through the rest of this year and have a fall report or winter report, is Article 3. And there were like 5 different points listed that they were going to be focusing on. And 2 of those kind of really caught my attention. One was on membership, who's actually a member of the UUA. And the other was on, they called it mutual obligations between members and the UUA. What's a mutual obligation? But the issue of the membership was, right now just congregations are members. Nothing else is a member. And so the issue that they're raising is, should some other groups be members and have so that their members can actually be voting like delegates and things like that. And that presumably means some of the identity groups and other national groups, for example. And there's a history behind this, is in the bylaws that still exist, which will be revised, there's something called affiliates. The UUA used to have many affiliate organizations. And I've been on the board of UUs for Just Economic Community for probably 20 years or so. And we used to be an affiliate. And as an affiliate, we had kind of a special status. We weren't like a congregation. We could not send delegates, voting delegates, for example, to GA. But there were some mutual obligations between the affiliate and the UUA. Like we had to report each year what we were doing. And we got certain privileges in return, is that we had some preference in GA programming. Some years we put on 2 or 3 programs all by ourselves, and other groups would put on programs. And right now, under Jenny Quarter, near end of her term, they disaffiliated all the affiliates. And one of the consequences of that is there's a lot more control of the programming by the central staff. They originate almost all the programming now. Whereas it used to be a lot of it came from these affiliates. And you couldn't just do way off stuff. You had to have, you had to be responsible and in various fairly mundane ways. It made sense. But there was, what was it? There was one group that gave them a little trouble at one point. What's the group about having multiple partners or husbands or wives? There's a special name for that. I can't remember right now. And so they decided to get rid of all the affiliates because of this one group that seemed to give them a little headache. But that was one of the things that's made it that centralized power, you see. And they may be looking at, when you talk about membership, they may be trying to reconstitute that, but in a way that maintains stronger control, or not, or makes, like, we didn't have, as affiliates, we didn't have ability to have delegates. Maybe that's what they want. So there's some big questions there. There's also questions, should individuals be members? That's not been true in the past. And that probably will be discussed. That would be a really big change in how that would play out. And that was one of the key items. The next item after that was, as I said, was they're gonna look at mutual obligations between the members and the UA. And they pointed out that right now, a church is only disaffiliated or basically ejected from the UA if it doesn't respond, if it stops making any contributions, if it doesn't respond to communications from the UA, and if after 3 years people have lost contact or they've heard it's been disbanded, it's written off. So these days, most churches stay in to the bitter end. They are kicked out. Almost no one is kicked out. I doubt if anyone's kicked out. They sort of disband or whatever like that. And apparently they're talking about changing things in some way there. And that's why there's a very big concern about congregational polity. Are they going to require that you meet, that you're in covenant with certain covenants, for example? And that's a big issue. Because who's going to interpret if you're in covenant with certain covenants or whatever? There's just a whole huge ball of wax, which could be in theory pretty innocuous, but in practice, a lot of us are pretty worried about it. And that could include staff and ministers also. They could be talking about further restrictions on staff and ministers, that in terms of meeting these mutual obligations or whatever.
Wow. Thank you.
Of course, that's not the way it happened, but that's what's coming up this fall, and presumably there'll be communications, and we don't know how it's going to be handled. How it's handled will tell us a lot about the future. See.
Thank you, Dick. Any other, appreciate that. Any other thoughts, questions for, well, I guess essentially anything, because we're about to wrap. All we have left to do for Dick, but for Dick specifically?
Well, I have maybe one more.
Sure.
There's a lot of other things went on in the General Assembly. I mentioned some of those earlier, like their rejection of the amendment on peace and reason, those kinds of things. There was one technical amendment on the RE credentialing committee. It was actually a bylaw amendment, a very technical thing, very minor thing. But the interesting thing there is they proposed this a few months ago at one of the board meetings. And I read the, before the board meeting, a few hours before the board meeting, it was put in what they call a packet. It's open to the public. They can see what the board business is going to be. And I read through that particular thing, just out of curiosity. It was about adding more members to this credentialing committee. And I said, it seemed to say that the committee itself would just add more members at their own option. I thought, well, should they have approval of the board if they're going to add more members or something? It seemed like, really, really weird. And I emailed the board president, Charles, or co-moderator Charles Dumont, and he had his staff look at it, and they actually changed the wording. And they realized that their wording was needed. They needed to add wording to it that said board members could be added if they've been approved by the board.
Good for you, Dick, for digging into the details. Golly.
So sometimes those things make a difference. And another thing that might interest you was there was an actual immediate witness on Solidarity with Palestine that was, of course, passed by a fairly substantial margin. It was put together and promoted strongly by Sophia Betancourt. I guess she calls her name Sophia Betancourt for some reason. So that passed strongly, but not as much as any of the, but by a smaller margin than all the other actions immediate witness. One was the one on climate, that was from my group, UJC, and there was one on COVID. That was actually made quite a bit of sense too. So I supported all three of them. But this one, if you're unaware of it, there's a very large group of, we call them Junitarians, Jews who decided to become Unitarians, but maybe ethnically they were Jews, and they voted against the AIW, Solidarity with Palestine, which is very much as the title says. But then they proposed, but in response to that, they proposed a responsive resolution that called on the UA to support, a resolution asking Hamas to release all the hostages. And this, I kind of surprised at first, this passed by well over maybe 75%, something like that, well over 70%, which I actually voted against it because it did put no obligations on Israel, but did on Hamas. But then what I realized is that this was a move by Sophia and the others in the leadership to sort of placate the Jewish part of the population, the Unitarians, who were very unhappy about it. So in that case, they did do something to sort of, they didn't want to alienate too many of those Jews. They actually did something to keep them in the fold there. So they can do that if they want to. And then the other big thing was the business resolution on for affirming everything for transgender people, including gender affirming care. And many of you know I'm a PhD mathematician, applied mathematics, and I'm a science journalist. And I'm very attuned to, especially in some of these things which get politicized, where's the science? And it turns out with this gender affirming care, when it's applied to teens, young teens, it often in practice ignores a lot of the science. And there was a 3-year study of England by the National Health Services of England, which said a lot of the existing scientific research or medical research is very low quality and couldn't be relied on. And I actually decided to vote against this resolution just because I know the gender affirming care language. It sounds totally innocuous. I could agree with 100% normally, but I knew underneath that they were trying to push this agenda of self-diagnosis of gender, and if you diagnose as gender and you're a young teen, well, let's put you right on puberty blockers and into surgery.
I'm gonna have to leave. If we need to decide on other meetings before I leave. And actually, we don't even have a quorum, but
okay,
I think we can.
Well, I'll just finish up anyway. The vote on that it was passed like by 90% or something. But afterwards, there was a report a little later from the co-moderators that there was a lot of trauma among the trans community. And apparently the fact that this science was not going in their favor was something they was traumatic to them. But there's this one group that represents some of these people. It's called WPATH, which supports science, only supports science which is in alignment with their ideology. And they were attacking this report from England, the Cass report.
Yeah.
And so there was a lot of upheaval over this. Now it turns out this WPATH group had commissioned its own report from Johns Hopkins University. And it just came out last few days that they suppressed that report and wouldn't publish it because basically apparently it agreed with the Cass report. So we got a super problem with following science on this, because that means we're not serving our youth well if maybe some are really gender dysphoric and works very well, but maybe others aren't. Maybe it's a passing phase or whatever.
Thank you, Dick. That's information I hadn't really heard at such a level. Unfortunate to hear about how it plays out at UUA or GA, which you're always good to share with us. So thank you for that. Right. Thanks for taking the time to go and then dig into details, get language changed, and share it with us.
Mhm.
Much obliged. Really, really appreciate that. So team, we have, like Tom's pointed out, we're less than a quorum. Who left? Who's here? I'm trying to look at my phone. Here we go. Betsy, Dick, Tom, Cindy, Luba. We probably have enough to set July's meeting since it's the new board that's going to be in that meeting anyway. So I think that probably be okay, flexible, flexing of the rules. So essentially all we need to do is figure out, you guys, when you can meet for your board meeting in July. I think I put something in the agenda, just kind of following the typical practice. Did I not? Let's see.
Oh, yeah, it would be if we followed that, at least for July, and decide later whether to do something else, it would be the 24th of July would be the
Right.
Wednesday, and the 17th would be the exec committee. If
Yes.
that works for Justin and Cindy, probably works for the rest of us because we have that time blocked out. How's
Any
that?
any objections, Justin, Cindy, to July 24th,
Seems to work okay for me. What time would that be?
4 o'clock?
All right, I guess I should have known that.
That's okay. We woggled around this week, Justin, so good to
Okay, I
ask.
was just gonna say it was 24th for UUCS board. Okay, that seems
Yes,
to
sir.
work. I don't see any conflict now. Was there
Awesome.
another meeting besides that?
There is no, I mean, yes and no. There's an executive committee meeting the Wednesday before at 4 o'clock that I need someone two volunteers to get on that call with Doug and put together the agenda for your July meeting.
Okay, so that's something that all board members should be at.
No,
No, I just need two folks. We usually have a small group, Justin, that get together. Usually it's the president, the vice president, and a rotating board member. So 3 total that get together for 30 minutes or so and put together the agenda for the next week's meeting.
I have a meeting that night I would like to go to slightly later.
Okay, so not volunteering.
I can volunteer.
Thank you, Luba. So we have Luba and Doug.
I would volunteer, but we don't have Doug with us, do we?
Oh, he's the one that dropped. I kind of de facto put him in there, even though he's not the technically the vice chair or vice president. He'll have to get reelected, but he'll probably step up for. Oh no, wait, he's traveling next week, isn't he? That's why we pushed hard to have this meeting this week, just because he was traveling next week.
Well, but he'll be back. He was going to camp for a couple of weeks, which would put him into, I think he said he'd be back.
Oh,
July
that's
11th.
right. Okay, well, I'll tell you what, I'll assume Doug and find somebody else if I can't. So, Doug and Luba and Tom.
Yeah. Yeah.
All right.
Yeah, we can do that. And you can contact Doug by email. Heaven forbid that would violate some kind of policy, but I guess it's necessary to arrange meetings.
No, I think that's what Lynn said at the beginning of her thing, that we're going to get her words written down. Exactly that. Logistics. All of that stuff is called logistics. Perfectly fine. So yes. Yeah. Okay. I'll contact him, Tom, and make sure. But Tom and Luba and Doug, we're going to provisionally put in as the executive team committee meeting to get our agenda together next month. All right. I guess that's it. I can call this meeting at an end.
Thank you.
Yep.
Thank
Thanks,
you.
everybody.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Mhm.